I was briefed about this discovery and surprised to learn that there were any government records that were taken there to that office.
Well, it seems like everybody's got classified documents. Not Whitney, not myself, but first it was former President Donald Trump, then Joe Biden, current president, of course, with documents, classified documents found in two different locations of the current president. And then we found it this week that former Vice President Mike Pence had some classified documents at his Indiana home. What might be some of those legal ramifications behind this, and what else could there be? We're now joined by 9 News legal expert Whitney Traylor for a bit more about this. Whitney, thanks for joining us. What is the kind of legal overview here? So we know there's all these classified documents. How much trouble are these guys really in?
Well, it depends. It depends on what they knew, who they showed them to, what level of classification. And this is the issue Merrick Garland wanted to highlight when he issued the search warrant for...
Merrick Garland, Attorney General of the U.S. Yeah.
Correct. When he issued the subpoena, the search warrant for Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago spot. But he wanted to, a lot of that was redacted. He wanted to make it public because I think he wanted to point out the seriousness of the situation. So right now there's a special counsel investigating both the documents from President Biden and documents from former President Trump. So we'll see what the investigation reveals. But it's hard to say at this point because we don't even know what level of classification on some of them.
Okay, so that is ultimately going to matter. Let's say, hypothetically here, that they're all roughly about the same level of classification. What would the next legal steps be, and how would that change depending on the severity of those on the importance of those documents?
Right. So if it turns out that they're, I don't know, maybe some innocuous documents and there's no national safety issues, then there may not be anything further. But they could prosecute under, I believe it's the Espionage Act, for potentially putting the country in harm's way. And that's what some of the allegations were, at least with former President Trump, was that some people may have had access to them. He was keeping them as mementos and things like that. And that's why, and everybody's saying, and I think rightfully so, that essentially they did the same things. President Biden, Vice President Pence, and President Trump, they all essentially had classified documents. We don't know at what level or who had access and those kind of things. But there's a big difference because, Joe Biden contacted the National Archives right away. He invited the Justice Department to search his house. For Trump, the National Archives actually had to contact him. It was a grand jury that had to issue a subpoena to get the documents back. And even after he said he completely complied, it turned out he hadn't when the FBI, which prompted the FBI search. So President Trump, it is more egregious in terms of his handling and his lack of cooperation. Now, what the documents actually reveal, or we may never know the exact contents, but the scope of the exposure is what the search is now. That's why they have the special counsel.
When it comes to, by the way, I should also mention, it seems like former Vice President Mike Pence also falls into the Joe Biden camp of I think, reported it to the National Archives. So I guess the big question that comes about this to me is, does intent matter when it comes to the Espionage Act? Because it does appear, to your point, that Donald Trump knew he had these documents and some of these things that they were saying, you got to give it back to us, and he had to be subpoenaed and everything, while Biden and Pence kind of willingly said, oops. Or the perception of what they're trying to say, to be clear, is, oops, I had some documents, here they go. Yeah. Does intent matter?
Well, I think it does. Certainly in the law, your mental state is going to be relevant. And here, that's why, that could be one of the reasons why President Trump he pled the fifth. So, because he was asked about these in a number of different settings. He was asked about the documents and other things, and he pled the fifth on everything. So, we don't know.
What does the Espionage Act say? What specifically does it outline?
And I thought I had it with me, but it essentially, and I may have it, I should have brought that with me beforehand. But it's a short statute, and I don't know how often it's been used, because essentially it is when somebody is engaging in activity that puts the national security at risk. So that could be someone intentionally doing it, or it could be just having top secret documents in an unsecure location, and if you knew about it, yeah, that could be liability, even if you weren't intending to create harm for America. In other words, the negligence could be, that serious.
So that's interesting to me, because if it's a short statute, that generally means that it's a bit more open to interpretation, am I right? And especially, I'm guessing with the Espionage Act,
Yes.
my suspicion here is that there's not a lot of precedent there.
No, that's exactly right, and this brings up a lot of the issues. I don't mean to pick on Mr. Trump, but he has so many legal cases going on right now, and this is a huge issue for our country to figure out: can a former president be prosecuted? Should he be able to run? So these are actually legal issues that we would sort out. I mean, they're just, we don't prosecute presidents in this capacity. And so this is, I used to tell my students, this is one of the benefits of the Trump administration. Whether you love him or hate him, he pushed the boundaries in every way. And so we really tested the scope of the government, and especially on January 6th, in terms of everything still going forward as it should with the electoral votes and things like that. So, with his use of executive orders and administrative agencies, there was a real question, because you remember, constitutionally we have 3 branches of government that are supposed to be equal. And if you have Congress, for example, issuing subpoenas, if the president had to answer to that, that would show that he's subject to their authority. And so these are why these academic issues come up about the scope of our government and the scope of the executive branch and things like that. Some of these things are also fairly new, but I'm sure there's probably other presidents now, past presidents, just looking in their garage to see if they have any classified documents. But one of the senators made a great point that they also have access to lots of classified documents, and this just doesn't happen with them. And so they pointed out that there needs to be a check on the executive branch if this continues to happen.
Absolutely. By the way, that means George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, and Jimmy Carter look on out. I think those are the last 3 living presidents that go through the garage, as you were saying there, Whitney.
Yes.
I guess when it comes to all of this as well, another question that just kind of pops into my mind is, well, when will we find out about this? Because will there be affidavits? Will there be some sort of public documentation that comes out in the next few weeks, next few months?
I don't know when we'll know. The special counsel and people were questioning, should Merrick Garland have put together a special counsel for President Biden, because he complied and he found the documents and reported it. And I think to take out the political aspect, Merrick Garland appointed the special counsel and basically treated both cases the same. So now, of course, President Trump's issue has been going on for ages, and he's been resisting at every front. So that, with the FBI and the DOJ, their investigation, that may not be as smooth as, say, the Biden and Pence. So what will be interesting, though, is you have these special counsels, so they're independent from the DOJ, appointed in the same way, sort of, essentially Merrick Garland treated both situations the same. So if the report comes out and shows, let's say President Trump, violated some act or knew about it, I think that's going to give it more legitimacy. But we'll have to see. And then if it comes out they're the same, then we'll know. And how much detail they'll share with the public, that's still, I'm sure we won't know the contents of the classified documents, or maybe we will know some of the subject matters, if it was dealing with defense or, innovation and technology. I don't know what what the documents may reveal.
Special counsels, in this case, to clarify, they make referrals, right? They say, we think this, but it's ultimately up to Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, if he wants to pursue it, correct?
That's correct, but they're going to do such a detailed and thorough investigation that it'll be hard for him to essentially not take the recommendation. But by taking the step of appointing both, he just could not have gone without a special counsel on Biden. That just would have just appeared too partisan.
Yeah, and I guess maybe one other scenario that plays in my head is I remember the Russian possible collusion special counsel, which Robert Mueller kind of famously led back in 2018. I believe one of his main referrals was he kind of punted it to, at the time, Attorney General Bill Barr, who decided not to go ahead with any possible further investigations or charges against former President Trump. So could that also be an avenue for the special counsel here?
You know, it could. And the special counsel, I was reading up on kind of how it's evolved from the 80s and 90s. And you made the distinction between a special counsel and an independent counsel. And these are both special counsels that makes the referrals. But some people are saying, well, you know, because in the 80s and 90s, you had this kind of carte blanche. And of course, the most famous is Ken Starr, who you know, happened to find a tangential piece of information on Bill Clinton that ultimately led to the impeachment proceedings. And so, you know, there's a question about the role of the special counsel, because you don't want politicians to be investigated at every front,
right?
Because then it can become partisan. These things, though, this particular situation, I think it warranted it. I think it's a serious enough situation.
For all three? For Pence, Biden, Trump?
Well,
or?
from Pence seems very innocuous. I don't know if a special counsel is necessary for Pence, but certainly for the two presidents, I think it would be important. And then there's one issue, though, on the timing as it relates to Joe Biden, because there was some people are saying that they knew about these documents in November and didn't disclose it to the public.
Before the midterms.
Correct. So would that have made a difference? Maybe. I don't know. These issues have obviously gotten some traction. We're talking about it right here, but I don't know. It seems like it's kind of dying down after the you know, the Mar-a-Lago search and everything was somewhat dramatic, but since then, with Biden and Pence, the public doesn't seem as motivated around it.
But couldn't Merrick Garland, who we've discussed before, he wants to, I think, come across as independent and not partisan one way or the other. I think he's seen that way, I think, by people on both sides of the aisle. If there is some sort of evidence, there's a text message, there's something in there that Biden knew about this before the midterms, and there was a disclosing, or they refused to disclose it before the midterms, that's pretty bad, isn't it?
I don't know that it...
or is it just politically ugly? Is it legally?
Politically, yeah.
Legally, not legally.
I don't know that it has much, you know, much bearing. No, because, and you're still talking about a short amount of time, and he was still completely cooperating and whatever. It was just about when it became public. So, you know, they didn't publicize it until after. But some of the documents they initially found were Biden contacted them before the election.
Okay.
So, but it wasn't publicized until after. And I've been seeing some sort of peripheral information about that. And so I haven't really followed up on that, but that's an issue too. But I think that's more on the political side.
So kind of summarize all this, and correct me if I'm wrong here, if I'm missing anything. So the exact classification of these documents is going to be really, really important. We don't know when we'll find out about the level of classification on those documents, and the special counsels will make referrals to Attorney General Merrick Garland, who's kind of, again, tries to, I think, push himself into the mold of being down the middle judge. Is that pretty much where we're at with this?
I think that's where we're at on points 2 and 3, but on point 1, I might amplify it a little bit and say it's not just the classification, it's who had access to them, who actually saw them. And the classification, though, because it could be restricted, which is a lower classification. Confidential is higher. Secret and top secret. And so, you know, will that make a difference? Well, it depends on what the capacity was. You know, were one of them sharing
nuclear codes
with Chinese businessmen, or, you know, whoever? I don't know. So this is why we have the investigation. So, and to me, I mean, of course, you know, President Trump pled the Fifth, which he had the right to do, but the conduct of trying to keep the documents and then saying one thing and then more documents showing up and then having to be subpoenaed to get the documents and then the FBI coming in, to me that is relevant. That is That sounds like more than I've heard some people explain it, that he wanted mementos and things like that. And okay, I guess if you consider top secret documents as mementos, okay, but how were they stored and that kind of thing. And so if somebody's that resistant, that's going to raise a red flag for me for sure.
On the flip side, though, when we talked about it a second ago, President Biden knew about these. Again, this is hypothetical territory here. To be clear, this is just some reporting about this, but he knew about these, that he had those documents and held off until after the midterms.
Well, if he held off in terms of, I think they contacted the National Archives right away and the Justice Department. I think nobody publicized it until later, and that's what I don't know. Now, let's say that they had the documents and sat on them for 3 months. Yeah, that would be relevant too. But again, depending on what the documents were, that seems like completely a political decision, right? So, but that could be evidence of, that was greater exposure to the country. The longer these documents were not turned in, the more exposure. So there's a lot of unknowns, but I'm glad we're having this conversation, because we're a relatively new country in a lot of ways, and this is how our common law system works. This is how our jurisprudence system works, in that it's evolving, it's common law, and we haven't had these issues before.
Any final thoughts about anything we haven't covered yet?
No, I think it's going to be interesting to see how the reports come out if they have divergent results. I think that's going to really put Merrick Garland in a tough position.
Yeah, boy, I was going to say that. The last job I feel I'd want to be right now would be the Attorney General of the U.S. right now.
Right.
'Cause he's going to have to, on multiple fronts, right? It's not just this, but he's going to have to make some legal judgments with big political ramifications, which I am sure is the last thing he wants to do.
Yeah, and I think I don't think that there will be prosecution. I don't think it looks like especially with Pence and Biden, there were not that many documents compared to Trump's. But again, I guess we just have to see what the documents actually were.
All right.
Which is we'll know soon, I think.
We'll know soon.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Whitney Traylor, when we find out, we'll be back on. But in the meantime, thanks so much for joining us here.
Sure thing. Good to be here.